Welcome, everyone, to the Religion Unplugged podcast, your regular plug-in for news as it relates to religion intersection with politics, culture, and life. My name is Joseph Holmes, Joseph as in the Bible and Holmes as in Sherlock. I'm culture critic for Religion Unplugged and also podcast host, sometimes of this podcast, but then of my own podcast, The Overthinkers. I'm very excited because today we have with us two kings of the faith-based movie industry. Yes, I just made them really uncomfortable right now. But don't worry, they deserve that title. Is Cary Solomon and Chuck Konzelman. I got that right?
You did.
Fantastic. They are, if you don't know their names, you have definitely heard of their work. They are the filmmaking team behind the God's Not Dead film, the first one. They also behind the faith-based pro-life film Unplanned. And now they're also making news this year for their new horror film, Nefarious, which is also, everybody's writing an article on it. Everybody is just, it is just going nuts over the idea of these faith-based titans dipping their toe into a horror genre, which we will get to in a minute. But yes, first, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Would you introduce yourselves and tell me anything about your pedigree that I didn't already give to the audience?
I'm Chuck. Chuck's the one with no hair. It's easy to keep straight.
And I'm the one who's starting to look like Chuck's hair as well. I'm Cary Solomon with the writer, producer, directors.
He's Cary, like Cary Grant, not Gary. Everybody Cary.
But with a C, right? And I think you've covered everything else.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on. First, I wanted to get started because, again, like I said, you guys, as long as there's been a sort of faith-based film industry in the past few decades, as we come to know it now, with Hollywood kind of abandoning faith-based audiences for a while, for a few decades, and then Passion of the Christ showing that there's an audience that really wants to see religious films that represent people's faith the way American evangelicals, at least in Catholic audiences and such, respond to it and understand it. The first people to take advantage of that were you would argue, the Kendrick brothers with movies like Face the Giants and Fireproof. And then after that, came you guys with God's Not Dead, which, made, over like $64 million at the worldwide box office, which was just insane and caused a lot of people consternation, both for for how much money it made and also for its content, which we'll get into later. But first, I want to ask you guys, how did you get started in the faith-based film industry and going in that direction? Because that is a career choice. That's, if usually people want to go into film and they want to go mainstream, or they're really into the Christian, culture and they want to do stuff there. They're not going into film. And so it's a very specific niche, the faith-based film industry. So how did you stumble into that, or did you charge headfirst into that? How did that go for both of you? And how did you start working together?
Well, first of all, as far as working together, we've known each other our whole life. My mom and dad, unfortunately, divorced when I was a child. And my mom took me out to Jersey, and he was the kid next door, and he's been following me around.
The way I describe the length of our friendship is that when we first met and started hanging out, my hair was literally so thick that barbers had to thin it before they could cut it. That was not last week. That was not last year.
So we've known each other forever. We decided one day to come out to Hollywood, which was definitely a spirit thing because we had never decided. We never even talked about the movies. We went to the movies. We loved the movies.
Sure.
But we just presumed that they showed up. And, we didn't put any process in the thought of how they were made.
But we did it for purely selfish reasons. We were like, okay, we could make a bunch of money and we could make movies, which would be fun. There'd be a lot of pretty girls around. What could possibly go wrong?
So what happens is 17, 18 years into the business, we were doing all kinds of things with the studios. We were working with Bruce Willis and Stallone.
Our craft level had gotten high enough that we were making a pretty good living writing for the studio.
Stan Lee and, all the cut stuff that people are familiar with. But we weren't happy. We, creatively we weren't happy. We weren't happy in there was just a multitude of things at the business. We also noticed that it was going very, very dark.
We had come to faith on a personal level, and there was a growing divide between our personal faith lives and our professional work, and it was to the point where it had become very uncomfortable. And so a shrink would call it cognitive dissonance. But normal people just say you're kind of ganked up, and it just doesn't feel right.
But so one day we're teaching a class at a place called Act One, and a young lady comes up to us, 21 years old, and says, "My mom's got a message from God for you." Well, that was a shocker. Here I thought I was, because I was good looking at the time. No longer. But no, that wasn't it.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, thank you. So we kind of, how do you respond to something like that? But we were, she was very nice, and she had some other questions. How do I do this?
She had kind of an unusual family background. Both of her brothers were priests. Her father was a deacon. If church was open, her mother was in there. And she's in the Catholic world, it gets referred to as a locutionist, someone who hears from the Lord routinely.
Yeah.
And she, certain other traditions in the non-denominational evangelical world, kind of the prophetic wing, people tend to be very comfortable with that. And a lot of the people that we've dealt with since then in the business there, but this was kind of new territory for us.
So, we met, we read the messages that were given to us, and we basically, there was an authenticity. We prayed on them. We went through 9 days. He asked us to pray for 9 days. And basically what the message said was, I want you to come work for me. I want you to follow me. I want you to pick up your cross and carry it.
We're from New York and New Jersey. There was no subtlety involved. Subtlety lost on us.
And so,
we had it confirmed from a couple of outside sources in the same 9-day period of time, people that from thousands of miles away who had no knowledge of what was going on. And we just said, this is beyond the realm of coincidence. This is a move of God. And if he is urging us to, even if he's not urging us to do this, this is what we should do. But if he is urging, this is what we have to do.
But it coincided with a turn in the movie theaters. They were no longer making movies. Everything was starting to get political. Everything was kind of dark. The good was bad. The bad was good, and I love the movies.
We couldn't just tell stories. We would tell stories or sell a story, and then they would want us to infuse it with some dark subplot or something we didn't want people seeing. And we're like, no, we can't do that.
And, we knew it was time because we were ready to go back to New Jersey. We were getting up blood, that kind of thing. And so, so when this happened, the Lord's timing was perfect. And so we decided, okay, we're going to fire our agent, our manager, our lawyer. It was fairly comedic.
We had done, So our agents had, we were with William Morris at the time before they became William Morris Endeavor. And we let them know we were leaving. They just screwed up a deal royally for us. And so they said, well, okay, they were initially upset, but they're like, okay, where are you going? What agency are you going to?
They think we're jumping to another agency.
And we said, we're not going to another agency. And they're like, don't do anything foolish.
They think we're going to kill them.
We'll send someone over, okay?
So send somebody over.
They literally thought we entered into a suicide pact or something. We said, no. We're going into faith-driven. We're going into
worse. We're going to get to faith-based films.
Well, yes. They didn't want to send anyone over at that point. They just didn't want to talk with us. It was so far.
So it's okay if you kill yourself. We'll help you.
Suicide was a reasonable choice. But going to Christian film, that's just beyond
that was just
we're not dealing with you. That's just crazy. That's just plumb crazy.
So what happened was we went in and we thought, I can honestly say, I know this is naive, but I believe that Jesus called us into faith-based film. So of course he's God. So it's a Friday. Monday, somebody will come to the door with a suitcase of money. I really believe this. Or the phone would ring and say, meet me here, or hey, we want you to do this. And it didn't happen. Right. And so what happened was, obviously, we actually went through the desert for several years. And we were saying to the Lord, did we do this right? I mean, I don't understand. And, we're trying to negotiate with God, which never worked. And but I will say one of the most telling, most powerful moments of our existence, we had a Jeep with an open top. went up into the Mulholland Hills in LA, and you can oversee the valley, and got out of the Jeep, and basically I cursed God. And it was one of the worst times of my life. I mean, I said things that, and I honestly wanted to get hit by lightning. I thought he was going to drop lightning on me like an old biblical, God, Zeus, whatever. And, like you see in the movies. And I felt terrible. I mean, what I said was so beyond the pale, F this and F that. And, why are you doing this to us? And it was just terrible on every level. And I fell to my knees, and I felt like, Jesus says, I hear this every day, but I still love you.
He knows what we say.
And I was like, how could you love me like that after I just said what I said? And I had relationships, my mom and dad divorced. I mean, nobody loved me. I mean, yes, my mom and dad loved me, but not like I was feeling at that moment. Every girl that I had fooled around on me, or, it was always messy. It was always something somebody wanted, right? He didn't want anything from me. And it was a profound experience. He entered my heart through a broken heart. And I just got up and I was like, I just said to myself, I'm yours. I couldn't wrap my head around it. 3 or 4 days later, he started to open doors for us. And it wasn't because I cursed him or that I was angry. It was that in a weird way, I don't know if it was I passed some sort of test in a weird way. I don't know what it was, but he started to bring us forward. And he said, you're going to work for me. And, God's Not Dead, you were speaking about, it happened by accident, but we got a phone call from this group of guys, and they said, we want you to do a movie. And we said, okay. They told us, all we have is the title. It's called God's Not Dead. And and they were evangelical, but we're Catholic. Well,
we had done a small film for them before, and we had done it at a rate of 1.5% of our old industry quote. So they knew they could get us cheap. So they're like, okay. So
yeah, they said to us, why would you do a movie for $500 when you used to get paid $500,000? And I said, my wife feels the same way. Okay. But I said, we're doing it for Jesus,
so God's Not Dead was a complete happy accident. I mean, it's kind of like that was a no budget film. It was made for under $1 million,
$930,000
after the credit.
And so we did it. We knew that it was special.
It was designed to go straight to home video. That was the sales model. That was the revenue model. And it got tested before some pastors, and it just did so well for that particular market. And now I see it in every business plan of every Christian film ever done.
Absolutely. It radically changed. It radically changed Christian film on a cellular level, and we ultimately went on. Domestic box office was 63, and worldwide was over $150 million off a $900,000 movie.
Yeah,
and so crazy. Now we didn't make that money. We got paid to work.
Sure, yeah, yes.
but those guys did very, very well. But it led us to our journey, which was a series of more films. We did God's Not Dead 2 and so on. Do You Believe, What If, and a couple other things. But the Lord then spoke to us and he said, look, I'm going to separate you from them, and I'm going to lift you up. I want you to do some things for me. And we were like, okay, Lord, if that's what you want. We were totally in the thing. But I had come to, and Chuck had come to, and we were having discussions. You can only make so many movies that are about a pastor or a priest. I said, Lord, I don't see how there's
the main storyline can only be, it shouldn't always be about becoming a Christian, because it's a very limited amount of character arc. It just, there's not much there.
No, it's one story, and God exists in all of life, which has many different stories in it. So that makes sense. Yeah.
And so, what happened was we spoke to him, and he said, when you make a movie like God's Not Dead, I'm very, very happy because the choir deserves entertainment. But when you do that, you're fishing in the Sea of Galilee. I want you to fish in the Atlantic Ocean. There are billions of people that don't know who I am. They can't spell my name. They don't go to church. So suddenly he gave us the permission to make a Western, to make a war movie, an action movie, a romantic comedy, a horror. But what he said to us is, look, you can make these movies. I don't need to be in the movie waving. You don't need to stop and read the Bible. Make the movies morally, because now everything is immoral. You know, good guys are bad, and all these things that were biblically foretold.
We're at a transition point, I think, in Christian and faith and values film. We're moving away from, if we're going to borrow from C.S. Lewis, he said we don't need more Christian books, we need more books written by Christians.
And so that's what
we're at the transition point into genre films that are being told with a Judeo-Christian viewpoint.
So we look at it as that we're not really making faith-based films. We're faithful men who make movies. Like Unplanned, he told us to make Unplanned. It was a pro-life movie, but we don't mention Jesus in the movie. We never, but everyone presumes it's pro-life, pro-Christian, because that's one of the platforms of Christianity is pro-life, theoretically anyway. Or the other thing is, and then he had us go and make Nefarious, which is, excuse me 1 second. Go ahead, Chuck, take it.
Yeah, so essentially, for those that don't know, it's a psychological thriller. It carries an R rating. So it's debatable whether that's justified or not, but it carries an R rating. The church, by and large, has been petrified of it up to now.
But I don't blame the church.
Go ahead.
I don't blame the church, because when you look at the poster, it looks demonic. It's demonic, satanic, right? It's like the typical horror movie. But we did that on purpose. And what people don't realize is we did that on purpose because we wanted the crowd to come to see the movie. When you see the movie, it's really C.S. Lewis's Greek tip letters versus meets Silence of the Lambs. It's like Jodie Foster talking to Hannibal Lecter. And it's really two men in a room. We don't drop F-bombs right and left. There are none. We don't have sex on screen. We don't do anything. The R rating was actually a political slam on us because the MPA and Hollywood knows Christians will not go to an R movie. They're presuming we're making a movie for Christians. We didn't make that movie for Christians. We made it for everyone. Now, it does have our worldview in it, obviously, but we told the story.
So there's a lot there that's really interesting, and you actually anticipated some of my questions sort of later on. But I think so. One of the things before we get into the horror aspect, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you have a very interesting story, because you talk about you are Catholic Christians, but you are operating in a space that's primarily sort of dominated by sort of evangelical and non-denominational spaces. You're making the faith-based film industry is mostly a lot of the people, and like you said, there's a lot of sort of Pentecostals in there, which is what we sort of way we talk about, and charismatics, where we talk about the people who claim to hear from God a lot more, and so directly. So what was that experience like? Was there a lot of kind of learning a new language, learning a new culture, going to being in, because you were, Catholics who were in the Hollywood space, and then you were Catholics in now the evangelical Christian space. Was there a new language, a new culture you had to learn for that, or was it pretty easy transition?
We were those guys.
Early on, it was a little bit.
So, everybody knew, okay, that's them, that kind of thing.
Early on, there was a lot, ironically, especially as far as entertainment is concerned, the biggest part of the learning curve is vocabulary. We just have different terms for the same ideas. Right. And so, so there are different ways of going about it.
Let me say this. Look, we have, most of our company is evangelical. We love our evangelical brothers and sisters. I quite honestly don't see the difference between us. I think there are some amazing things on the evangelical side. They do very, very well. Faith in God, the Bible. I mean, they really work it. Fellowship is amazing. I think we have things on their side that they would enjoy too. I think
what are some of the things that you think you bring to the table that evangelicals could learn from?
We have a really good potluck on Sunday.
Which we don't.
I think that there are things like reverence of, I think saints are misunderstood, for example. Everyone thinks we pray to saints. We don't pray to the saints. We ask them to go before the Lord and intercede for us. The Virgin Mary. I mean, we as Catholics believe that the Virgin Mary is the mother of God. No evangelical denies that. But we put a status on her of immense of love and caring.
If we were to look,
she's the mother of God. Would you not? From our point of view, but in the evangelical space, she's not really that important. So we think
there's such a concern that her importance is overstressed that sometimes she's run away from.
Sure.
We're more in line with the Eastern churches refer to the Theotokos, the mother of God, in that way, and we're more aligned with that. So I think there's strength in some of the sacraments that we
Sure.
employ.
Yeah.
Having the Eucharist, we do confession, we do a lot of things. But what I will say is that, look,
there's a depth and a poignancy to certain things, which I think is one of our strengths. In the evangelical world, there's an outpouring of the Holy Spirit in worship.
Sure.
Quite frankly, when we're there, and there's an emphasis and a strength to fellowship, which is not present in the Catholic world.
But it's in a different way. We're an introverted faith. They're an extroverted faith.
Sure.
Okay.
I can see that. Then there's a lot of, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but again, this is sort of my experience too, that what Catholics do really well is tradition and structure, and holding on to all of the good ideas that have come about throughout history. And
right.
Evangelicals and Protestants tend to be really good at doing something new and doing something creative partly because of the lack of structure. So there's that.
That makes sense. And on the extreme end of the spectrum, as part of the Unplanned tour through Eastern Europe, we went to Mount Athos, which is Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox monks.
Yes.
And they view the Roman Catholic Church as the way too modern changes.
Yes.
And they still use the same liturgy and the same language.
It's all relative.
The same wording as the 300s.
Yeah, we're those new kids.
We're the on the block. The funny thing was when we traveled, we had to get the heathen and heterodox visa to enter.
But I will tell you what happened with us was, like I said, we love our evangelical brothers and sisters. I don't see any problems. We've never had problems.
Sure.
There are certain people we know that
our producing partners, evangelical.
There are certain people who basically just dislike Catholics to dislike
sure,
them.
Yeah.
And so, look, you know what? I'm not going to fight that. But the bottom line is, I think what the devil did was very successful. He split everyone. And I think, sadly, most Christians spend more time fighting each other than the bad guy.
Sure.
And there's a deterioration on multiple levels. But what we have is that we have a special thing going on. When we shoot a movie on set, we have an evangelical ministry team and we have a priest. So we have for the Catholics and for the evangelicals. And
okay.
It's a line item in the budget. And we pray together.
And we go to both services.
Okay. But we pray together. And it's amazing what happens.
That is really cool. Yeah.
And then there's a love thing going on both sides. Look, I told Pureflix when we went to work with them, because they said, why would two Catholics come to work for an evangelical company? And we said, Jesus told us to. And they couldn't wrap their head around it. And I understand. But here's what got them, I think. I said, look, we will never offend anything you believe. But in turn, don't offend anything we believe. And so and there were only little places here and there where it talked about, really, if it's about Jesus, I think people got to calm down and remember who this is about. This is about Jesus, okay? And so it's not about this or that. You want to discuss that, we can discuss that. So, I think it's been a delight in our life because we get to, we've gone to evangelical services. We've done all kinds of.
We've had discussions on this. Steve Dace, who wrote the Nefarious plot, which inspired the film, he's from a very traditional, strong, conservative, reformed background. Mm-hmm. That's his background. He likes his gospel unvarnished. and our producing partner is non-denominational evangelical, would be how he would describe himself. He's out of the Bethel, H-Rock kind of tradition. And then we're pretty traditional Catholics. And what was really amazing to me, too, on this film, in terms of the content when it was done, I expected we would have had to have hit, because we're dealing with the demonic and a theological response to the demonic, I would have figured that we would have hit some tripwires somewhere.
Sure.
A disagreement between the denominations. And there's just been nothing today.
No.
There's been universal acceptance on that, and I'm shocked. And one of the first people who saw it was, we did an early screening for the film wasn't even 100% complete. We screened it for Glenn Beck's crew in Dallas, and we had a visitor. We had an Oxford-trained theologian who's with Dallas Presbyterian, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. He came and he was enthralled with the picture. He gave us an unqualified recommendation, and that was sort of one of the first guys that saw it and gave us that. And we've just seen that over and over with this.
Somehow it crosses all lines.
Yeah.
And, in my case, my mom was Protestant, my dad was Jewish, and I was confused. They asked me if I want to go, you want to go to temple, you want to go to church, or do you want to play with your friends at 9 years old?
Yeah, what are you going to choose? Yeah.
Okay, right. My mom has since become a Catholic. Unfortunately, my dad is an atheist, and I'm a Catholic. So, life is unusual, but I think the Lord calls us all to work in his fields. And I will say this, I believe there's a dark time we live in, and I believe when they send the buses to gather us up, they're not going to have a bus for the Catholics and a bus for the Protestants. We're all going to be on the same bus.
Well, well said. So now, okay, I want to move on to the horror side and talking specifically about this film, because I'm going to say is, again, I grew up, I'm Christian, and I grew up, loving movies, and I did not grow up liking most Christian films, but I didn't always grow up liking most horror films. I did develop a greater appreciation for horror films as I got older. And one of the things when I watched this film, I was rather shocked by, is it reminds me a lot of the horror films, the low budget horror films you would see in the 1970s that would get made. They were really stripped down, and what they were really trying to do was just disturb you as much as humanly possible they could. That was their agenda. They didn't have anything super deep going on except this. This was sort of their kind of, and this is, The Exorcist is the biggest and most popular example of this, but there's a lot of those from that era. But they're basically saying our modern society is not capable of standing up to actual evil. There's sort of a lot of, they would basically just have a normal person that would meet something scary, and then that scary thing would be as disturbing as anything you saw in your life as a viewer. And they would, and that goes back to Dorothy Sayers would do the same thing. She's a Christian author and God did Gothic sort of horror back in the early 20th century. But a lot of those 1970s movies were doing that. And that's when I watched the film, I was like shocked. It's like, because you talked about, the R rating coming from sort of them trying to get one at the Christians. Honestly, I think it earned its R rating because, and I don't mean that as an insult or a criticism, there are scenes in the movie that you made which will stick with me for the rest of my life. And I say this as somebody who's watched a lot of just ordinary and disturbing movies. You have, and when you portray this person who's, this serial killer who claims to be possessed by a demon, and he's talking to a skeptical psychiatrist, and that's sort of the premise of the film. This serial killer, the demon, is the things that he does, first of all, just to torture, his subject, which again is like, those were moments where it's like, okay, you're not trying to make a theological point, except just how evil these entities are. And to make us feel that, and not just tell us that, but make us feel that. And of course, the scene where the demon, again, spoilers, this is an interview with people who made a movie, guys. Spoilers for people if you haven't seen the movie. But the scene where the demon is celebrating an abortion as it's being done. I will remember that scene for the rest of my life whenever I hear about an abortion being done. And of course, so this is a deeply disturbing movie. But of course, I understand, again, just like those old movies from the 1970s, what you're trying to show is just what evil looks like and how unprepared we are as a modern society to handle that unless we recognize it as evil, which I think that's I'm getting that right. That's sort of the point. So you're kind of trying to make. But I guess what I would say is that you talked about your journey of, okay, you decide you were in Hollywood and you're like, okay, we can't make movies sort of based on our values of this environment. So so God says, okay, make movies for me. And so you make faith-based movies in the faith-based genre, partly because those are the people that are going to hire you who are going to, make movies you're comfortable making. And now God says, okay, I want you to make movies for not just the faithful, but for movies that for everyone, right. But they're being made by Christians. Just like atheists are making movies, they're for everyone, but they're made by atheists. You want to make movies there for everyone, but done from Christians. So, right. But what made you decide to do horror? I guess it's because and why this story in particular? Because again, I reviewed your movie positively. I did this thing where I said, because again, I actually said to a friend afterwards, I say, in some ways, again, if you understand the genre, and kind of what it's doing, it's like a low budget 70s horror movie. I was like, this is an almost perfect movie. I said to my friend who went to say this when we went to see it. It's like, and then of course I posted that on a Facebook page, and this sweet little lady said, horror movies can't be faith-based because they open the door to the demonic to anybody who watches it. And so, I kind of had tried to not be mean, the mean 30-year-old, guy talking to this sweet little lady who's probably more dedicated to, her faith, has won more souls for Jesus than I probably ever will. But, let's say, well, maybe not always, and so what is it your mentality saying? Why did you want to make a horror film, transition to that of all places? And why this particular project to do that?
Well, we didn't want to make a horror film.
Okay.
We actually tried to make a comedy. It just didn't work out. No, we didn't want to make the movie. What happened was Chris Jones, who's our producing partner, came into the office and said, listen to this. And he read a paragraph out of a Steve Deace book. Steve Deace is a talk show host for The Blaze. And he had a book called Nefarious Plot. And the paragraph was compelling. I didn't know it was Steve. It's his book. And then what happened was I said, hey, that's great. Get the guy on the line. Let's make a deal. I think sooner or later, one day, we'll make a movie. But at least we have it in our vault so we can get to it, right? So he says, well, Steve made it. Well, Steve had helped us with Unplanned. We had a real hard time with Unplanned. Everybody was banishing us, and trying to put us out and cancel us and the whole thing. So we felt an obligation to Steve. So we got on the phone with Steve and he said, hey, we want you to make the movie. And we're like, oh, yeah,
eventually.
Yeah, eventually. And he was like, no, we want you to make the movie. And we're like, we'd be honored if you made the movie. I'm like, thank you. That's so nice. It's so wonderful. But I'm thinking, no, we're not doing it. We're going to do a Western. Okay. Or we're going to do whatever we want to do. We
want to make one of our movies about angry men with powerful handguns trying to kill each other.
Right.
It's our turn. We just got out of Unplanned. The Lord owes us that, right?
If you had to compare people to dogs, Steve is a pit bull.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he grabs on and he does not let go. He's like, no. We want you to make our movie, and it's important. It's good, and we're like, yeah, okay, listen, we'll do it, but we've got some stuff. And he's like, well, let me ask you a question. How much would it cost to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, well, take a number. I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, well, throw something at me. And I'm like, and now, never do this at home, folks, because bottom line is you have to actually make the movie.
This is the equivalent of when you're watching a car ad, closed course, professional driver, do not attempt.
Okay. We don't have a script, so I can't budget it out because I don't know what it's going to be. We don't even know what the movie is. And the book.
We have no story.
And there's no story in the book.
There's not a story in the book.
The book is just a rant.
It's kind of a series of sermons of a demon talking to the reader about how he destroyed Western civilization.
So Steve, being the pit bull, is like, well, just throw me a number. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And I go back and forth. And he says, oh, so, between friends, just let us know. I said, okay, $2 million. And we move on until the check appears in the mail for $2 million. And we look at each other and we're like, oh, crap.
And if we go back to comparing human beings to dogs, so like most producers, we spend half of our time searching for funds. So we compared ourselves to a couple of golden retrievers who spend their lives chasing fire trucks. Now you've got one, you caught one. You got to figure out what to do with it. So we're going to go write a movie that works within this budget range.
Now all of a sudden we realize we got to do this movie because we got $2 million sitting in the bank, and they're not going to wait 3 years for this to do.
Yeah.
So we fought the whole way, but what made the movie? I'm not kidding.
We said, well, what could we do? Well, how about if we had one hero set? It was really impressive, but there was one hero set. We locked these two guys into this set. We made it an arena environment in screenwriting terms. And to make sure that the demon isn't too powerful, we'll chain them to the table. So we're like, okay, that'll work for us.
We go through our process. But the problem is now we know we have to make the movie. We fought it for a year. and we would do 3 pages and then try and find an excuse to go do something else. And we went back and forth. What made us do it ultimately in the end is that we kept getting guided back to everything. Like we'd say, let's go do this. And then the Lord would say, nice kids, and bring us back to the line. Okay.
And the COVID lockdown really coincided with us starting this project. We locked down for COVID. We spent a month finishing up a comedy we were working on. And then it was time to do something. We said, it's time for us to go do this.
And so we, at the end of the year, we said, okay, you know what? We knew the Lord was constantly guiding us back. It was the Holy Spirit. Everything we did led back to it. So we said, okay, we got to do it. And then we decided to do it. We put the muscle into it. And it took a long time. It was the most brutal thing we had ever done. It's a very difficult to script to write because we had one caveat. We cannot be boring. Not for 5 seconds, because if we were boring for 5 seconds,
we were like
we'd lose them and you'd never get them back.
I compared the story to an airplane flying 5 knots above stall speed. As long as we stayed there, we would be fine. If we slowed down just a little bit, we would drop like a brick.
And so that's what we tried to do. So we kept balancing everything, and we do what we do. And the bottom line is that, praise be to God, it worked out, and I believe it's anointed.
The Rotten Tomatoes is 97, 98% is where we tend to sit with the audience approval, which means the audiences that see it actually like it a lot.
And the critics hate it.
Oh, according to the critics, it's the worst film ever made.
Believe me, that can't be true because God's Not Dead exists.
But the spread wasn't as big. The spread wasn't as big. We have the largest, to my knowledge, we have the largest spread between the audience approval and the critic of any dramatic film ever made.
That's incredible. You guys are just ratcheting up, accolades.
Everybody loves us.
Oh my goodness.
No, I think this is really interesting. I think, so again, you were reluctant to do it. And he's like, but what, I guess, so you're making this movie, you're making this sort, like, what is to you the justification for making it as just utterly disturbing as you did? Well, I guess first, actually, I'm going to give you a compliment because again, I remember, again, I have not enjoyed the other movies you've done that much. Again, I found them to be the typical things that people have said, kind of preachy, dry dialogue,
on the nose,
faith-based stuff, and
which is what they're engineered to be.
Which exactly, yeah, and I think, and sometimes I found, I found with like God's Not Dead, I found, I don't know, somewhat distorted picture of what actual legal system or academia actually looks like. But now for this, again, I remember things like the best example of comparison to dialogue I could find is actually the TV show Loki that Disney Plus put out and Marvel put out, because I remember watching that show and saying that, all of the dialogue in here is really just characters psychoanalyzing each other. But they're doing it, and that could be really boring and really on the nose in a really it's like you can't just be telling people what the characters are like, but they got away with it because they did it in snarky banter back and forth. And I remember watching your movie and saying, you're getting away with getting to be like, make the points like the philosophical and cultural points you're having, because everybody is sneering the dialogue at each other instead of saying it. In fact, I'll say the one part of the movie that I didn't like was when it became an interview at the end with Glenn Beck, because then it was just preaching. It kind of went back to the just preaching thing, but everything else in it was like really great like that. But one of the things I do want to ask about is, how do you feel in terms of like making a movie that's this disturbing? Because like the sweet little old Christian lady said, there is this feeling that if you show this kind of disturbing stuff, that it can do harm to people. It can, you bring this up, desensitize people to evil. It can, make the demonic, kind of feel powerful and something that gets under people's skin. And that's oftentimes the way, Christian films, I've talked about this with film critic Tyler Smith. He talks about the fact that in the Christian world, portraying something is oftentimes the same as glorifying it. So how did you feel doing this? Did you feel like there was any lines that you didn't feel like you could cross, or how do you justify doing something that's not just a horror film in name, but is truly disturbing film?
Well, to make a disturbing film was our intention from the beginning. What this film does in a very real way is that Charles Baudelaire, I believe is the original quote, restated by Kaiser Soze, the character in The Usual Suspects, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. He's actually pulled that off on our society. And we believe that whereas we as a society believe that we're engaged in a cultural struggle, and we're arguing that back, it's actually a spiritual struggle. It's a fight between good and evil. That's what's actually going on. So we rip the mask off and we remind people that there is a devil, there is an adversary. Christians, by and large, seem to have forgotten that, okay? Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew talks about hell a lot of times, 17 or 18 times. Okay, he mentions hell. So he's pretty concerned about the whole concept. We've kind of forgotten about it. And what we said is, if we portray the gift that we got from the book was this character, Lord Nefarious, who's effectively a lieutenant of hell. Mm-hmm. He's here in the story, and it becomes basically interview with a demon. If a demon was going to have an honest discussion with you, and by honest, we mean from their legitimate viewpoint, and you were going to talk it out for an hour and they were going to hold nothing back, what would that feel like? What would that sound like? It would hopefully be very unsettling to you as a human being. Yeah. If it felt comfortable, you should probably be worried. So it would feel very uncomfortable. And the great irony of this piece, and maybe at some point we should talk about it for what the storyline is for your audience members that aren't familiar with it, but the demon, one of the great ironies is that the demon is completely familiar with Judeo-Christian scripture. Mm-hmm. He knows it cold. As he says at one point, I know more theology than any human being who's ever existed. Mm-hmm. But he spits it out. He knows all of it, but he despises all of it with equal or greater intensity. And that's what makes the whole conversation interesting. Mm-hmm. And the psychiatrist who's examining him, by virtue of being an atheist, or at least deeply agnostic, he calls himself an atheist, he's at least very deeply agnostic. The demon looks at him like he's some kind of a moron. Mm-hmm. And he just basically says, the demon's attitude is, how could you be this stupid? I mean, I know we've been working on you people to get this for a while, but we ourselves find it hard to believe that you actually have embraced it to this level.
I think when you say disturbing, I think evil is disturbing. I think when you put truth in a movie that is anointed, I believe the movie's anointed. I believe the Holy Spirit, again, this is what I believe. I'm not saying anyone else believes this, but I believe that the Holy Spirit used us as a tool and he worked through us. And and we pointed out to people that there is darkness in the world. Mm-hmm. And I would say to any person who's seeing or listening to this, when you walk out your house today in the morning, or you're on the way to work, or you're in your car, can you honestly say to me that the world is the same as it was 10 years ago or 20 or 30 years ago? There's something wrong. Something is off. There's an evil that's present. The world seems like it's plunging into darkness on a certain level. And so this darkness, we said, look, we believe the Lord had us make this movie because the timing is perfect for this movie, because evil has risen. And when evil rises, you need the equivalent in light and good. Good is the only thing that can fight evil. And so what we're saying is, look, we're pulling the devil out of the darkness and into the light. And we're holding him in there. And we're then saying, take a look at this. Listen to what he's saying. Do you understand that if you believe that this is real, you're in big trouble, because a lot of the things you do are leading you into these situations. Reiki, yoga, tarot cards, Ouija boards. People don't realize Ouija means in French and German, yes, yes. You're submitting to a willing demonic possession. We're surrounded by horoscopes and rune stones and crystals and all these crazy things. So yes, on the disturbing part, but we wanted to disturb people not with somebody walking across the ceiling or vomiting or saying foul things. We wanted to disturb them with the truth, to show them the devil is real and you need to come to understand this, and to sober you up. God does not yell, he whispers. I believe the devil is frantic in the world today because his time is short. The Lord has separated the wheat and the chaff, but he's crying out to the chaff still. Listen, pay attention to what I'm saying to you. Pay attention. And that's what we tried to do in the movie. We just tried to show the truth.
Both the goal and the technique were the reverse of normal horror. So the goal was not to desensitize towards the occult evil. It was to resensitize towards the occult evil.
That's very good.
And as far as the portrayal, the best description I've ever heard of what should and shouldn't be shown is from Barbara Nicolosi. She said, founders of Act One, she said, the portrayal of sin should not become an occasion of sin for the audience. So, like, if we go all the way back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, vampires typically and traditionally in their presentation, with maybe the exception of the Bela Lugosi stuff, there's been a deep sexuality and sexual attraction that's always been part of vampire. Well, it's part of the draw towards, and the teen vampire whole thing, if not sexuality, then romance, and all of that. So that becomes part of the glamour of evil that falls into this. In this film, I think it's safe to say there is nothing attractive about the evil. The evil is presented now, occasionally tries to masquerade as being a little bit charming or a little bit humorous, but it is always something which repels the viewer. They are not drawn towards this. They're pushed away from it, saying, I don't want this in my life.
And I'd like to say something that we're finding. People are going to see this movie 5 and 6 and 7 times. Never happened with God's Not Dead. Never happened with Unplanned. There's a fanaticism in the movie. Like, these people are being reschooled. They're being resensitized.
Well, how about the priesthood? There's a friend of a friend, who reported back to us that the friend of the friend went to Catholic confession. It's technically called reconciliation, but we use the old term confession, At the end, the sins, the priest absolves the sins, but he also imposes typically a duty. It's prayer, whatever, called penance, right? Yep. The penance was to go see the movie Nefarious. Now, this took place 1,000 miles from here, but there's something going on. And when does this podcast air? Just so that I know.
Hopefully next week, sometime, maybe a week after.
So I'm safe in saying this then, because I can't preempt the other announcement. But one of the foremost cardinals of the Catholic Church today gave us an absolutely unreserved, glowing recommendation for this film, and a recommendation, the equivalent
never happened.
Of an imprimatur for a book. In other words, literally let this be printed. He's saying, go see this movie.
It's really, really cool. Then congrats on that. Yes, you also are getting talked about on Reddit because people are trying to explain. It's like, hey, horror fans, just to let you know, don't be tricked. This is a Christian movie, which is a really entertaining.
Hey, we love them too.
We're hearing about
of course.
That. But they have a problem too, because some of the horror fans, we did an hour-plus interview last week with a horror site that really liked us. It's called Without Your Head, and they have views in the real world that differ from ours. And we had a great, amazing. We were scheduled for an hour, and we talked for an hour and a half.
No, it's fantastic. And I have to say again, like I said, the movie is very much the best of the old school, like 1970s horror films. And because it's trying to disturb you with, but like you said, I think that's really, I'm going to probably steal that, the whole thing about resensitizing people, because that is an excellent way to put it. I think the best scenes, oftentimes the best social commentary that you do. Again, I'm judging this as just a movie that's like trying to do cultural commentary and social commentary and character study. But some of those scenes where it's like, okay, you're going to commit 3 murders. And of course, you start saying like the things that like, oh, the ordinary things that I do are the path to hell. and resensitizing it to the things we do. That's a great old school Hollywood thing, not just a faith-based thing. So you're doing a really good job of those things. Actually, I'll say this, the other thing I would have loved to see more of is sort of in Mike Flanagan-esque fashion, a little bit more character development about the psychiatrist and his growing up, how through his whole life he's sort of been doing this, and sort of make it more of a character study aspect. I'd love to see you do more of that in your future as well, just because, again, I think you're actually on the path to making some really great films. Now I want to talk, because you brought this up, and let's go deeper into some philosophical worldview stuff, because you do that in here. And you brought it up, is you'd have this conversation about, the psychiatrist saying, hey, the world's actually getting a lot better, so you guys are losing. And the demon responds saying, you're deluded, we're winning. And what's funny about this, and I got a big kick out of this, and my friend who was there with me, nudged me. It was like, this is really entertaining, because I published an article this year that actually was arguing about the fact that, one of the weird things that Hollywood is doing right now is acting like we live in a dystopian world when we don't, because most of the data says that the world is getting better. And I think it's really fascinating. And so I was really entertained to see somebody publish a counter argument to me in this case. But I want to kind of unpack that a little bit and sort of, give pushback to what you talked about the film, so you can kind of push back on that. Because, the psychiatrist says, look, poverty is going down, freedom is going up, literacy is going up. He brings up kind of those data points. And the demon responds that, racism was going down is another thing the psychiatrist said. And then, the end, of course, and he talks about people can love who they want, etc. And the demon says, well, people are not reading, only a 6th grade reading level, and, and people are, and talks about all of the, the slavery. There's more slavery today than there used to be. And I find that argument to be kind of weak, honestly, because yes, there are people in the West, maybe people who are reading at a 6th grade reading level, but that's something that as a free society, we can actually have the means to change if we want to. Whereas in previous eras, people didn't have freedom about their literacy. And it seems to be offset by the fact that all around the world, literacy is increasing to the places that we want it to be. We do have, child mortality is going down, which, so you can't, undo the fact and that's because of global capitalism and things that Christians support. All those things are increasing. Yes, there's more slavery now than there used to be, but that's because there's more people than there used to be. It's not, and even if it's true, we do have a moral, the fact that it's outlawed in most places is a moral development. You can't undercut the fact that, racism is going down everywhere. Oppression of women is going down everywhere. Even you talk about people's, you talk about, things are, more demonic than they were, 20 years ago. One of the things everybody who's in the West hears when he says that is like, yeah, but in those previous decades, Black people couldn't, do the same drinking fountains. Are you saying that today is worse than back then, when there was so much more violence, so much more racism, so much more of those things, political freedom around the world? It just seems that, on an objective level, all of these things of violence and racism and political were much worse before, and we're beating those things as a Western societies, as global societies. We're beating a lot of things. Now, of course, we have problems. We have abortion, you can say, is a problem, but abortion has always existed. The pro-life movement hasn't always existed. And so that's even an improvement of where we're going. You can talk about gender ideology, but even that's getting pushed back now. I just don't see a scenario which you can argue that evil is winning in the world or is more demonic than it used to be. And I do think that it is kind of harmful to perpetuate the idea that it is, for a couple of reasons. One is that it makes people say, well, basically the thing is, if things are so bad, it means that the world we've built is not working and we should tear it down. We should tear down liberal democracy, capitalism, American freedom. That's what the sort of the secular world does. Okay, our world is a dystopia. It's because of capitalism and the, and democracy and freedom and Christianity and stuff like that. So we got to tear that down, cause riots in 2020s. On the Christian side, it's like, yeah, we got to replace it with Christian nationalism. We got to riot in the Capitol. We got to do things like that because our world's a dystopia. So we need to treat it like it's dystopia. And it also depresses people to think we're not actually winning this fight against evil as Christians. So, and that's sort of been the problem with a lot of the, among smart Christians, the sort of the God's not dead kind of movies, is that they've portrayed a world that is where Christian persecution is more active than it actually is. There isn't a professor who acts exactly like that without getting censured in academia in the movies. And it does create an environment where people do hate each other in political polarization more. So I guess that's when I look at that, I see this is not a correct way of looking at the world, and it does do actual harm to people to believe that, rather than saying, oh, there's actually even the world that still needs to be fought and we can fight it and we're winning. It's everything's getting worse, and therefore we have to do something radical that we're not already doing that's actually going to do more harm than good. What would be your pushback to somebody like me who thinks that, and a lot of our listeners and viewers might think that as well?
Sure. Well, I would start with, it depends on the definitions of what you're doing. So let's say if you were to embrace, let's say, for an opposing viewpoint for
yes.
60 seconds, and you were to say, well, let's say, understand that right now in the United States, we've just kind of crossed the line. There are more children aborted than there are born alive. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about the statement of infant mortality decreasing, it really depends on how you define infant mortality. Mm-hmm. I would define infant mortality to include those who are electively terminated, those who are aborted, which means that mm-hmm. we're at the highest infant mortality rates in all of recorded history. And if there is a creator God who believes that is a killing, that is a murder, mm-hmm. we've got objectively a pretty heavy weight of sin. And if that was the case, that is regarded as evil by the Lord God, then the demons would rejoice in it. So that's mm-hmm. kind of the way the movie operates. I believe the one place where you can absolutely argue that the traditional world had failings was in racism. And racism and bigotry, absolutely inexcusable in the West, the way certain classes of people were treated, owned, sold as property, and the rest of it. And overcoming that to the greatest extent possible is the one great advance that I see. Mm-hmm. I think it's impossible to argue that life hasn't become more comfortable. Okay, mm-hmm. We're about to move to Texas. Moving to Texas in an era before air conditioning to me would be unthinkable. Mm-hmm. It's just as irrelevant. And in the long history of humanity, mm-hmm. air conditioning is a pretty recent development. But as sort of the part of the theme of this podcast, faith, when you talk about faith unplugged, the decline in faith and the decline in the degree or intensity with which faith is practiced, where we would hold that is a strong negative. We believe mm-hmm. that post-Christian Europe, which is truly post-Christian now, is in a worse shape than it was. And the statistics as far as the mental health and sense of well-being mm-hmm. would tend to bear that up. And if we're not very careful, we're going to follow in that as a culture. And if we're not very careful, we're going to make the same mistake regarding self-extermination that Northern and Western Europe are doing now. So Eastern Europe is already lost. It is done. The demographic time bomb has actually already exploded, not because the wave of people is dying, but because they've aged out of the reproductive years. Mm-hmm. So now it's just a question of how long it takes for the tree to fall. So these are all, and if there was a malicious evil looking to destroy a society, we believe that a number of these moves would be moves that malicious entity would look to undertake. So that's kind of our worldview. Mm-hmm. And so that's the way we operate. Now, can there be discussion? Yes. But part of the problem has been, by the way, we don't have a framework for legitimate discussion anymore. Unplanned is an example, which was strongly pro-life, admittedly. but was a real life story of a
Mhm.
Planned Parenthood clinic director who became a pro-life advocate. We were so abused in the marketplace, we actually were called on to testify before Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on suppression of conservative thought. We could not buy advertising on any cable TV other than a Christian channel and Fox. Twitter shut us down on the night of our release. When they reinstalled us, we had a better than 1,000 to 1 reduction. We went from 225,000 to 2,100. Abby Johnson could not follow her own movie. And it was only kind of an outcry by conservative journalists that even got us reinstalled at that 1,000 to 1 reduction. So we get with our product, Unplanned did over $20 million at the box. You'll never see it on Netflix, not because we don't want it to go there, but because they wouldn't give us an offer. We couldn't use international distribution through a studio or otherwise. So, at a certain point, we are on the other side of the discussion. And I think at a certain level, you're not intentionally so, but it's a little bit hypocritical to say, well, we should go have a fair discussion. Well, when we try to have a discussion, we are suppressed. We're demonstrably suppressed to the greatest extent that these broadcasters, the studios, these organizations can do so. So we're not necessarily the most receptive to, I think it's really time for you to gentle up. And does that make sense?
Sure. No, it does. I think that that's very fair. I think what you say is very interesting. People see things these differently is because a lot of the things that are getting better are things that most people agree are good things. Like, we agree that it's good that, fewer children are dying in starvation throughout the world now than there used to be. And that's exponentially increasing year by year. Everybody agrees that's a good thing. But only half of people, agree that it's a bad thing for for abortion is a bad thing, And so, in my point of view, again, and this is sort of where I come down. I think you're absolutely right. The whole the biggest negative that you can that everybody has to agree exists, and this is people don't take this seriously enough because of how long and consistent it's been, is the mental health crisis. Because most people talk about this as starting, with the cell phones and the things, but it's actually been going down precipitously since the 1950s at least, So, and so people don't take that seriously as the demographic problem is. And you're right, the fact that people are essentially, self-suiciding as a human race in terms of the fact that, we're not having children is a big problem in terms of whether or not we want to continue existing, or if the people who are old want to take care of themselves. I do think that the thing is, I think that there are enough bad things you can talk about that you don't have to talk about things that are not happening or minimize the good things that are happening. I think that, again, if, for example, I've had discussions with the people who some not all, but some people who are doing the continued work of God's Not Dead movies. And it's like, you could, I was telling them, you can do a movie about, if you again, from a conservative viewpoint, if you're talking about bad things happening, you can do a movie about the, transgender laws and things like that. It's like, no, we want to do a movie about how a fictional priest and a fictional politician is wanting to ban the word God from politics. It's like, okay, well, that's not a thing that's actually happening and nobody is proposing. So why are you making things up when there's an actual thing that you could talk about as a bad thing? And the other thing is, you don't need to minimize the actual good that is actually happening, because again, what happens is then people say, well, let's get rid of the free market system. Let's get rid of a liberal democracy and instead install a theocracy. When you do that, do you think there's validity in that kind of desire for maybe a more nuanced look at the way things are getting better or worse?
Well, I'll use the storyteller's cheat. If the devil is arguing with you, there's no reason he's going to fight fair. So if he's having the discussion with you, he's going to make you as uncomfortable as possible. And ironically, the way it takes place in the film mirrors the way in actual exorcism it takes place, which is that the demon's goal or objective is to engage the exorcist in intellectual conversation, which does not bear directly upon the exorcist.
Yeah, I will say this. I'm going to say this. One of my favorite parts was the priest that doesn't believe coming in, because I audibly laughed when I saw his garment. When my friend, my friend who is less familiar with mainline denominations as I am, I was like, I know where this is going, and it's that kind of like satire that I kind of miss from Christian films. That kind of just like that I like seeing you do. Okay, so before we end our discussion, because I want to respect your time, and this has been really fun. I would say is, because you've already talked about, usually my ending question is kind of what you want people to walk away from, but you're so good at these interviews, you must have done them a lot. You were already anticipating my questions. But I say, what is, again, you're unique individuals, I would say, in the Christian film world. And the reason, no, I mean that as a completely neutral, valually neutral statement, because you were there at the beginning, but you're also at a point where you're innovating with it right now. And so you're saying you basically created like one of the three pillars of the original of the early 2000s faith-based film industry. It's like Facing the Giants, Passion of the Christ, and God's Not Dead. It's like, but now you're also innovating it by saying, hey, we're taking faith-based into horror films and taking it into genre filmmaking, as you say, taking it into genre filmmaking. And so I guess, what would you say? And I think it's very interesting. You talked to the fact that, you kind of were making faith-based films that were kind of like everything people said you didn't like about them because that's what they were supposed to be, which is what I've heard other people in the industry talk about. But I want to say is, ask, what would you say is where you think is fair criticisms of sort of where the faith-based genre has been, and where you would like to see it grow and improve going forward, whether that's mirroring your kind of path, saying, hey, I want to do more genre filmmaking, or what you would like to see from faith-based filmmaking going forward to grow as it grows into, as it continues to evolve.
Well, I think that I'm not sure that can happen as easily as people would indicate, because the problem is we have the whole system designed against us. I mean, the media is controlled by one political party. There's no way that, so for example, when somebody says it's a Christian film, that moniker basically it's
a pejorative term.
It's designed to basically say, don't go see this movie. This is crazy people who do garbage movies. And the bottom line is that, if, for example, let's use, even normal movie makers, when they started in the 20s, it took time for them to master their craft.
Absolutely.
By the 30s and 40s, they got it. I think Christians are getting better at making movies. I mean, I Can Only Imagine was a wonderful movie. You've got other movies that are out there that are coming. And I'm not saying, look, I do agree that a lot of Christian movies, the people that are doing it have a lot of heart.
Oh, yeah.
However, they shouldn't be given a camera. So, and it's just the fact is that not everyone can make movies, okay?
And the obstacles, by the way, that you have to overcome if you're a faith-driven filmmaker, you typically have to find your own financing. You have to be your own executive producer. You have to be your own writer, or find a writer usually to work for reduce. A lot of times you have to be your own director. You have to be your own producer. You have to be your own distributor. You are expected to wear far too many. It is very difficult to secure acting talent because they don't want to be labeled.
And that's because we've been defamed. We're basically been blackballed.
And so I compare it, and sometimes we'll hear the same things from Christians. The extreme argument from Christians I'll hear sometimes is, well, when faith-based films get better, I'll go see them, and I will point out to them a little less than charitably, maybe with a little bit of backspin. I'm like, well, that's like meeting your baby, your newly born infant in the hospital, and giving them cradling them and saying, you're a beautiful child. If you manage to take care of yourself, put yourself through med school and come home, I will love you. And then just leaving the curb and expecting them to somehow manage the rest of their lives with no resources. It's completely unrealistic. I think actually the greatest hope for faith-driven films is to make this transition successfully to where there's a little bit of God smuggling going on, where we become mainstream films with a Judeo-Christian worldview underpinning it. And to borrow from C.S. Lewis yet again, not to have more Christian movies, but to have more movies made by Christians, to where it's mainstream content that carries a faith message in there, but it's the caramel and the Snickers bar. It's just one part of the overall confection. I think we can win that way. That's what we're looking to do. That's what we're moving to do a studio to do. I think maybe 1 in 5 of our films will be straight on the nose, faith-driven films, maybe 1 a year. But for the most part, we're looking to do mainstream entertainment and Nefarious. And by the way, we're guilty of this because we kind of market it as a horror, but it's really a psychological thriller. It's a psychological thriller with heavy horror undertones is what it really is. This is part of that transition. I would say this is 50% of the way out onto that transitional curve. And I think the next picture will be fully out on the other side of that transition.
I mean, I think, look, over a period of time, Christian film is going to get better. I think, does anyone want to see a bad movie? I don't want to see any bad movie. It could be a Muslim bad movie. I don't want to see it. Okay. Yeah. But you have to admit that as a Christian, we're the only people that get labeled. Do Buddhist horror films exist?
I haven't seen a Buddhist horror film.
Right. So they don't exist, and they haven't been labeled. And if they did exist, no one would label them that way. They would say.
Well, in a Buddhist view, the horror would be an illusion, therefore. But it's illusory. It's not real, so you need not fear it.
But I think with time, all things mature. Wine becomes better, right? So in other words, but I think the fruit of our tree is the work we do. I think we know how to make movies. I think we're going to continue to make movies.
We cut our chops in the studio system, so we know how to go make a normal, for lack of a better term, movie. That's what we're looking to take our values with us and go start making some genre.
And ironically, I think this is going to work out because I think there's an immense vacuum in the world for what we do. I think Hollywood is busy killing itself with the woke agenda and the politics. You don't go to movies anymore in Hollywood. You go to political propaganda. Where is Top Gun? Top Gun made $1 billion and everybody loved that movie.
And it took 3 decades to get here, right?
Okay. I mean, Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, Terminator, Harry Met Sally. Those were real movies, the 80s and 90s. They don't make those anymore. Where's kids shows or cartoons? They don't make that anymore. It's all political propaganda. And I would just disagree with one thing as far as evil goes. I believe it's more rampant now than it has ever been. Everything that is good has been flipped. Bad is now good. Good is now bad. Every movie has an agenda. Every TV show has an agenda. There are more movies about Satan and Lucifer and on TV and serial killers. I mean, we're being suffocated with evil on every level, from children. I mean, they're being sexualized. They're being mutilated. I mean, these things are not good. So I would just say I disagree. I believe that evil is running amok. And the only thing that we're trying to do is stand up and say, pay attention here. There is a devil. There is evil in the world. And so that's what we're trying to do.
And we have had, it was not part of the subject of this podcast, but when I tell you the string of calamities which has followed this movie, wow.
There is a devil.
What I've seen this year in terms of faith-based films is really interesting to me. I think, and look, all the people who are trying to say, okay, we're going to do something, create essentially a counter industry with Angel Studios, with Daily Wire, with Blaze getting into the movie industry and all the other. I just see every day I see somebody announcing they're going to create another faith-based studio or something like that. And so it's definitely and again this year I've seen more variety in the genre of faith-based films. And again, like the Angel Studios is just announcing a sci-fi dystopian thriller, about multiverse coming out next year. So I think there's there's definitely a growth that's happening here. And I'm really excited about the fact that you guys were there kind of at the start of it, and that you're also, like I said, trying to innovate with it. But yeah, no, I appreciate. I really enjoyed this discussion, both where where we had common ground and where we disagreed somewhat. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you would say to people before you left? Anything you want? Any place you want to send people to find you, or to find your projects, or something you want to leave them with before we head out?
Well, what we'd like to say to you, and then we'll talk to them, but is that we are going to send you a full-size poster signed of God's Not Dead. Okay? So you can have it in your bedroom, right there.
And maybe one of the Spanish release ones too.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Opposite walls.
We even have it in Polish.
We don't even do that in our office. But
I would actually be flattered. I'm not saying I'll keep it, but I would be flattered.
Look, we are, yes, we'd like people to go to see the movie. The movie is being, now, of course, this is from our perspective. We feel that Hollywood is trying to suppress the movie. We're down to 330 screens, give about 300 now. But we have massive trending upward. People actually going to the movie.
Rebookings based on increased per screen averages. Some of the chains, 2 of the 3 major chains, and one of the major regionals are adding theaters in week 4 of release.
Our numbers are surging. Our per screen average is surging. This Sunday we had higher numbers than last Sunday. That never happens. So people are getting the hang of it, that this is a really good movie.
Ironically, it's the faith-driven world that's discovering the film and discovering they can trust it. They've been petrified of it. And we had just, Jack Hibbs came out, who's, very much on the conservative side, and he gave us a glowing recommendation. So one of the regional chains with a theater near Calvary Chapel just reopened a theater and said, we know there's more business.
So we're seeing a reverse now from this to this, and we hope that we increase in theaters. But if you can go to the theater and help us, that would be wonderful, because if you want this kind of material, if you don't help us, eventually we will get choked out.
Yeah.
Sooner or later. It's just, unfortunately, the movie business requires money to make movies.
It is not a hobby.
Yeah, it's not that. And we've tried printing money, but that doesn't work.
If you like hobby films, just think back to the Christian films of the 1980s, and you'll have.
So, but and then of course we'll do all the VOD, the platforms, and all of that stuff. So people will get it eventually and stuff.
Yep.
But look, the thing we really want people to know is not to be scared of this movie.
No.
It does show truth. It does show good and evil. It does show that there's a devil and a God. But it doesn't show people walking across the ceiling. There's no horrific scenes.
Here's an Easter egg: that big, scary, demonic face poster that's out in front of every theater, just scaring all the believers away. The artist for that is Jason Pearson. He designed the poster for The Passion of the Christ. He's a total sold out believer, and he brought all of his skill to this for this purpose. This is to lure in, like you said, that there's the arguments on Reddit. Horror fans, stay away, or you'll accidentally be exposed to Christianity. That was the whole purpose.
But I will also say this, when you look at that poster and stuff, there was a purpose and a reason why we did it. Look, if people want to know, the fruit of our tree is God's Not Dead, God's Not Dead 2, Do You Believe, What If, Unplanned, Nefarious. That's all good fruit. We promise our brothers and sisters out there, we would never betray you. This is not a movie designed to make money. It's a movie designed to tell the truth.
And every filmmaker at their core, if you really look at them, they only make movies about one thing. It's just figure, and if you look at the filmmaker, you'll figure out what that one thing is. We're always about the fight between good and evil. That's the only thing we've ever made movies about, and probably the only thing we ever will make movies about.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, it's a pretty good thing to make movies about. Go ahead and say your piece, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm going to have Linda reach out to you for your address. We're going to get to the Polish God's Not Dead, right? As soon as
I love it. I love it. My friends will have so much fun hearing about that. All right. Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Sir, gentlemen, this has been an honor. Really has been. I mean that sincerely. Again, my name is Joseph Holmes. You can check out my work. I write regularly for Religion Unplugged, and I also have a podcast, The Overthinkers, where we talk about faith, culture, arts, and philosophy. All the kind of stuff we talked about today, talk about there, so you can go check that out as well. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And remember, this is Religion Unplugged with your regular religion plug-in.